Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a book review of the short story and novella collection Star Wars: Tales from the Empire, edited by Peter Schweighoffer. This is one of the many Star Wars short story and novella collections that I've read. Last year, I decided to start reading through some of these, and I've read through them this year as well. I read the 3 Kevin J. Anderson collections. I read through Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, Tales of the Jabba's Palace, and Tales of the Bounty Hunters. I thought that Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina and Tales from Jabba's Palace were okay. There were some good books, there were some bad books, but overall, it was just okay. I actually quite enjoyed the Tales from the Bounty Hunters, though. I thought that one was really good. So that one was because it was a novella collection, only 5 stories instead of like 15 or 20. But I picked up Tales from the Empire as part of my completionist goal to finish all of the Star Wars EU books for the adult line. And this book is actually 9 short stories and then 1 novella. The way they designed this is short stories from the Star Wars Adventure Journals, which was being published in the 90s, and they collected some of the stories here. And about half of the stories are from what we'd call writer alums, people who had written for Star Wars. You had 3 stories written by, there were short stories written by Timothy Zahn, Kathy Tyers, and Michael A. Stackpole, 3 people who had written Star Wars novels. But then you had 6 short stories, which were written by authors who had never really contributed to writing, Star Wars novels. These were new people. It gave a chance for new writers to participate. And then you have 1 novella, which is actually co-written by Timothy Zahn and Michael A. Stackpole, and that's at the very end of the collection. There's also an introduction at the beginning that explains the history of Star Wars publishing. It talks about how the Adventure Journal got started, how West End Games got started, and then it talked about how they got all these authors together, and it talks about how the process of creating this book came together. That discussion to me was fascinating. I love reading about the publishing business. However, it went on just a little bit too long for what this book was. I love reading books and articles about the publishing business, but this was 18 pages of this book were just devoted to that background material, and also then some of that was also dedicated to talking about the editor himself. And I feel if he had cut down that information to maybe 5 or 6 pages and really distilled it down, it would have been really good. That being said, I was still fascinated by the whole publishing history here. Then you have the actual stories themselves. And the breakdown I would give this is that there are 5 great stories in this collection, for short stories that is, 4 short stories that were not so good. Maybe they were okay, but most of them I didn't really care for. And then there was 1 novella, and that novella I thought was fine. It wasn't amazing, it wasn't bad, it was just kind of fine. And so I'm going to go through, talk about the stories, but first I want to say that this book could have been retitled Tales of the Smugglers, because so many of the stories are either about smugglers or freighter captains that become smugglers or rebels posing as smugglers. That's very common in this collection. And that was, to me, a little strange that so many of the stories were like that. Maybe that's because that's the archetype that you choose in the West End Games, and they're basing these off the West End Games. Maybe that's what they're choosing, but it felt a little weird to me. Then, also, unlike the Tales from Jabba's Palace or Mos Eisley Cantina or Bounty Hunters books, all of these stories are all set at different places in the timeline. The other tales of books, they're all very condensed, and they're all in the same location or all at the same time, and you see the same thing happen over and over again, and you're like, we get it, we know the bounty hunter meeting happened, we get it, we know that Han shot Greedo, all of that happens over and over. Here, though, you don't really have any of that, and instead, these short story collections, or short stories and novella, tend to connect to a lot of different stuff. There's connections to the novels, there's connections to the movies, there's connections to other events happening in the Star Wars galaxy. So it was just really cool to see them all spread out. That being said, you don't have like a timeline in here, or they don't say like at what point in the time frame each short story takes place. So some of the short stories I'm reading, and I don't exactly know where in the timeline they take place. And then about midway through the short story, someone shows up, and I say, okay, well, it has to be before this event because that character's alive. And then it'll be, well, this character shows up. Well, they don't show up till after this event, so it has to be, at this point. So it was a little bit strange kind of figuring out the timeline, and I think had they included just at the very beginning of each short story 6 BBY, 4 ABY, or something like that, it would have made a lot more sense for the book. But let's go ahead and talk about some of these short stories and the novella. So the first story out of the gate was a Timothy Zahn story. Obviously, you can tell that what they wanted to do was hook you with the big name author, because Tim Zahn at the time was the king, and still really is, the king of Star Wars books. So they start with a short story from him about Talon Card, who is kind of joining this kind of smuggling group, and he's infiltrating this group and learning some information, and he also gets to meet Mara Jade, which it's not really a spoiler, even though it's at the end of the short story. As soon as you meet her, when Tim starts describing her, it's instant that I knew it was Mara Jade. I was like, it's not even a surprise. But he meets Mara Jade, and that was kind of cool. And unfortunately, that's the only cool part of the story. I actually thought the story itself was very weak. I thought it was like the plot of the story was pretty boring. Then you had a short story by Kathy Tyers, who again at the time was a little bit of a bigger name because she had just written The Truce at Bakura. She had written some short stories for the Tales of collections and novellas, so she was one of those established Star Wars authors at the time. And I thought her book, a short story, wasn't particularly great either. So I was really discouraged having 2 not-so-great stories. Hers is about this heiress to this manufacturing group, and her business is kind of co-opted by the Empire, and she has to escape because the Empire eventually wants to kill her and her family. And that short story, it had some cool ideas, but the story itself was not so great. So I was just so demoralized going into the third story. And then I picked up the third story, which was written by someone I'd never read anything by, Patricia A. Jackson. And it was the best story in the book. By far. It was an amazing story. The third story in here is about this pilot who is hired to transport this Force user to another planet, and he's learning who this Force user is, what he's doing, and he develops kind of an interesting rapport with this Force user, and the Empire stops them, and they have to deal with the Empire, and there's all this political stuff going on, and it was a really short story, but it was a great short story. This is how it almost felt like a mini novel. It really did. It felt like it had a good beginning, middle, and end. It had good character development. It had good plot. It had good everything. Great themes. I thought it was a great story. And so I was very excited when that story was just so good. And the book then just had several great short stories after that. You had a Michael Stackpole short story after that, which talks about Corran Horn and really shows how he ended up joining the rebels after being a Corsac agent. And that was actually a very good short story as well. We then have, and I'm going to refer to my notes just to remember everything, we also have the short story Retreat from Coruscant by Laurie Burns, which follows a mail freighter captain who is assigned by the New Republic to transport some information, and they get stopped by the Empire and stuff like that happens. That was a pretty good story. But it was set during the time of the New Republic, which was really strange that it would fit in this collection. I think this really should have been Tales from the Adventure Journal, and that would have fit better than calling it Tales of the Empire. But the Empire does show up, so I guess that's why you could call it that. But that story was pretty good. And then we had the story A Certain Point of View by Charlene Newcomb, which follows an Imperial named Celia who is just grappling with some heavy ideas about the Empire, and she's got a lover who's in the Empire, and she's got a friend who's in the Empire, and she's dealing with some basically a crisis of conscience in this short story, and I thought it was a pretty good short story. Then we had the short story Blaze of Glory by Tony Russo, which follows Brixie Ergo, who was part of a mercenary team, and unfortunately this short story was so unforgettable. I just read it and I don't even remember much from it. It wasn't a good short story. That one was unfortunate that it wasn't so good. You also had Slaying Dragons by Angela Phillips. This was one of the shortest stories in the collection, but it was delightful. It's about a little girl who dreams of joining the Rebel Alliance, and so she ends up kind of sneaking onto this ship that her some cousin is on, and kind of helping the cousin out with the Rebel Alliance, and it's delightful, and it's cute. It was fun. It was a fun read. I really liked Slaying Dragons. Then we have the short story Do No Harm by Aaron Edom, which follows a Dr. Leith in the Empire who has to transport a prisoner who has some medical attention stuff. This one, again, was one of those, I don't remember it well, and I just read it today. It's not a great story. So, as I said, there were 4 okay or not so good stories, and then there were 5 great stories, which is actually, for a short story collection, a pretty good batting average. And then you have the novella at the end. The novella features Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole writing. It's called Side Trip. And Timothy Zahn wrote part 1 and 4, while Mike Stackpole wrote parts 2 and 3. So Tim wrote the beginning and the end, Mike wrote the middle, and I think they released it in the Adventure Journals, parts 1 and 2 together, and then parts 3 and 4 together, so that you had both a Tim and a Mike story in each Adventure Journal. That's how I understand it. And this story follows this group of this freighter group that is hired by the Empire to haul a person out of their way. They were supposed to go and deliver this cargo over here, this food cargo. Instead, the Empire conscripts them to carry this mercenary, and I'm putting mercenary in quotes, this mercenary Jodocast over to this underworld area of Corellia because they have to transport Jodocast there. And so they do it, this group does it, and again, getting caught in the mix of this is 2 Corsec agents who, if you know Michael H. Stackpole, you probably know exactly who these Corsec agents are. And as such, when they get sidetracked on this side trip, they end up helping undermine the underworld, this criminal underworld, which is like controlled by the Black Sun. And it turns out that was the Empire's plan all along. And there's some great twists here. There's some great ideas and really cool scenes here. There's a great reveal in the first part 1 and a great reveal in part 4 that I thought were both really good. I thought that there was some cool action in parts 2 and 3, but when you put the sum of the 4 parts together, this almost 90-page short story, it didn't really hit me like some of the it was a novella, sorry. It didn't really hit me like other novellas have. And I just felt it was fine. Like, it wasn't a bad story. Like, I'd give the novella itself like a 6-ish out of 10, maybe a 6.5. It had some really cool moments in each part, but the sum of the parts itself didn't seem amazing to me. And of course, it's kind of interesting that even though Tim and Mike are sharing characters, some of Mike's characters show up in Tim's stuff, some of Tim's characters show up in Mike's stuff. It's pretty obvious if you didn't know who was which writer, if they had left the names off of them and let you guess, you probably would have figured it out. I think you probably would have figured it out. You just knew Tim wrote 2, Mike wrote 2, who wrote which ones. I think you'd probably figure it out, I guess. But I think it was a mistake to put Boba Fett on here. I think I would have put, instead on this cover, I would have put an Imperial Star Cruiser, an Imperial Star Destroyer or something. So that's my overall thoughts on the collection. There were 5 good short stories, 4 not so good short stories, and then 1 novella that was kind of okay. And that's not a terrible batting average, and the good short stories were really, really, really good. And the bad short stories weren't awful, they weren't memorable. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. I think it's better than Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, and I think it's better than Tales from the Jabba's Palace. But Tales of the Bounty Hunters was a pretty good short story collection, and I think it hit a lot better than this one did. So that one's still the top. I still have one more short story collection to read for Star Wars. That is the Tales of the New Republic, and then I've read all of them. I also read, of course, Lost Tribe of the Sith, but that's kind of separated because it's in the Old Republic era. But I only have one more collection to read, and then I've read all the short story collections, and I could focus on the novels, which I've got about 22 novels left to read. So if you've read Tales from the Empire, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.